In the attack group of the barracks 1957, Sean South and Fergal O'Hanlon and others. His father took part in Maguire, and Sean is carrying on the footsteps of his father in a very, very active way. Sean, no matter where you ask him to be, he'll be there. Sean lives now in Commemeration. Any part of Ireland is never too far away from him. He's always there. And like he gave us a great hand last year in Galway during the elections, as did other people that are here, the Roscommon people that made a big contribution, and Stephen French and them that came canvassing and all that. So Sean is never wanting. So Kate me the forge, Sean.
Gura maithagad tomós. A cóirte agus a camrádaí. Is on our more dumps of vet and shot a large live anew. And at Easter, as Republicans, we gather all over the country to remember with pride our patriot dead. All of those who made the supreme sacrifice for Irish freedom and independence. And that struggle is ongoing. It's unfinished business. And I am very proud to speak in County Mayo today, here in Kilkelly. And County Mayo has made a very important contribution in the struggle for Irish freedom. In 1916, one of the leaders was John McBride from Westport. And of course, County Mayo has provided many important Republicans over the years. Too many to mention. I will mention a couple. Ernie O'Malley, Tom Maguire, General Tom Maguire, and we're proud that his grandnephew Adrian Hare is here today. And what Adrian said earlier was spot on in every respect. Jack McNeela, who died on hunger strike in the 1940s. And of course, two hunger strikers, Michael Gahan from Ballina and Frank Stagg from Hollymount, who both died on hunger strike in English jails in the 1970s. And of course, the great Dan Hoban, originally from Castlebar but moved to Newport in the 1950s, a lifelong Republican. We lost Dan a few years ago, and what a huge loss that was to the Republican movement. And here in County Mayo, as I said, made a huge contribution over the years, right back to 1798 and before that. And who would have thought in 1798 that Mayo would play such an important role? East Ulster and Leinster rose up in a blaze of rebellion against the Crown. And just a few weeks after the rebels in Ballynahinch, County Down, and the rebels in Vinegar Hill, the rebel camp near Enniscorthy in County Wexford, were put down, a French expedition arrived in Killala Bay, led by General Humbert. And with the assistance of Irish rebels, they took Killala, they took Ballina, and then they moved on to Castlebar and put the Crown forces on the run in the races of Castlebar. But of course, we know that that wasn't a decisive victory. And General Humbert waited in Castlebar, waiting for reinforcements and for instructions from his superiors. And at that time, the Republic of Connacht was declared. But no help or reinforcements were forthcoming, so his forces moved on to County Sligo. They won a battle there in Kilkelly, then moved on through Leitrim and into County Longford. And of course we had the Battle of Ballinamock there, where the Irish and French forces were met by a much numerically superior force of 30,000 Crown forces under General Lake, and there could only be one outcome to that. The French soldiers were treated with mercy and imprisoned, but the Irish were slaughtered. Just 2 weeks later, Killala in North Mayo was taken back by General Trent, and thereafter there can only be what described as a reign of terror unleashed by the Crown. Hundreds and hundreds were slaughtered, anyone who was suspected of having any connection with the uprising. And the High Sheriff of Mayo, Dennis Brown, a brother of Lord Altamount, he put dozens and dozens of men to the scaffold in Claremorris, Castlebar and other towns, and to this day he's remembered as Dennis of the Rope. And on Garthamore, Mayo was particularly badly hit. At that time it's estimated that 90% of the Mayo people were dependent on the potato. And we know what happened due to British colonial policy. The exact numbers of people who died during on Garthamore is unclear, but historians now believe that it was in excess of 100,000 people in County Mayo alone. And there are still reminders in this county of on Garthamore. The workhouse sites, the famine graveyards, the deserted villages and houses. And of course, Michael Davitt from Straight, County Mayo, was instrumental in setting up the Land League. And there was a meeting in 1879 in Irish town near Ballandine, attended by a few thousand people, and the National Land League movement was born. And of course Mayo played its role during the events of 1916 and thereafter. And we must remember today General Tom Maguire, who played a very important role and a very important and significant figure. He took part in the Termakeedy ambush, and there were other important events, the Kilfoley ambush and many others, Cara Kennedy, throughout the Tan War. And the Civil War, County Mayo, almost to a man and woman, with a very few exceptions, took the right side and opposed the Treaty of Surrender. And we know how this state, the Free State, was born. This state is stained in blood right at the very start. I mentioned Ernie O'Malley earlier. He took part in numerous engagements right across the 4 provinces of Ireland during the Tan War. And he was there in the forecourts in Dublin with Rory O'Connor and Liam Mellows and others, when the Free State forces, with 2 18-pounder guns and other weaponry supplied by the Crown, they attacked the forecourts and they tried to crush the Irish Republic. And Ernie O'Malley and other Mayo men like Tom Maguire, of course, took the right side as always at that time. and the Free State, right at the very top level of cabinet, took the calculated decision to execute dozens and dozens of men in cold blood. This is the truth of how this 26 county state was born. Right across Ireland, including in Tuam and County Galway, the 6-2 martyrs, Athlone, Rossgrey, Waterford, Dundalk, Carlow, so on. The Free State made a conscious decision to, I suppose, implicate all of the Free State generals in the policy that came from the very top of the Free State illegal administration. And Tom Maguire's brother, Sean Maguire, who was aged 17, was one of the volunteers who was executed in cold blood in Tuam Workhouse in April of 1923. Now, Tom himself was told that he was going to be executed, and probably because the reason they didn't was because he was a TD at the time. But the executions, all of them, but especially Tuam and Athlone, they came towards the end of the Civil War, and it was nothing short of an act of complete vengeance. And I have no hesitation in calling it a war crime. Those 6 young men were shot by Free Staters in Tuam. And of course, Tom Maguire, many years later in 1995, he was very proud to unveil the very impressive monument to Tuam in County Galway. And he was there that day. And he remembered his men, because they were his men under the Western Command Division of the Irish Republican Army, who were shot in Athlone and Tuam. And he remembered them with pride, but also with sorrow. And he said that those who spilt the blood of his men were unfit, unworthy. And Tom Maguire, in 1938, along with 6 others, 7 members of the 2nd Dáil 32 County All-Ireland Republic, he, with those 6 others, at a meeting with Joan Russell, the IRA Army Council, handed over, delegated the powers of the Irish Republic to the Army Council of the Irish Republican Army. Because, as we know, the first Dáil in 1919 was a 32 county All-Ireland Parliament. The second Dáil was also a 32 county All-Ireland Parliament. And the second Dáil was never dissolved. It was overthrown illegally by Free Staters with the support of British arms. And any subsequent entity describing itself as Dáil Éireann is nothing of the kind. The so-called Third Dáil was a 26 county illegal assembly. And Tom Maguire, when he was elected to the first Dáil and the second Dáil, he took that election seriously and honestly and logically. That he was elected to a 32 county Dáil, the first and second Dáil. And as we know, in 1969, reformists wanted to subvert the Republican movement and take it down the road of recognition of the Leinster House of Parliament. And again, Tom Maguire, it was a very easy decision for him because it was the simple, logical decision. He rejected those reformists, and again, as the surviving member of the second Dáil Éireann, the 32 county legitimate parliament, he recognised the authority of the Army Council of the Irish Republican Army. And again, in 1986, a similar pattern, reformists who wanted to recognise the illegal 26 county Leinster House talking shop, and they wanted to do away with the important principle, the moral principle of abstentionism. Again, those reformists, they came to Tom Maguire to look for his approval. Well, I tell you, Tom Maguire told them where to go. Make no mistake. Because Tom Maguire, again, consistently, and the documents were published posthumously, he recognised in 1986 the authority, the legal authority, and this is a historical fact, the truth, the Army Council of the Continuity IRA as the lawful successor of the second Dáil. And we must remember today the hunger strikers, Jack McNeela, who died on hunger strike in the early 1940s, and of course the 1940s was a very bleak time for Irish Republicans. The Tans were bad, the Free Staters, and in the 40s the Free Staters in the guise of the De Valera administration, by God they were bad. They tried without success to crush Irish republicanism. Prisoners were held in appalling conditions in the Curragh concentration camp. Old huts left over from the British Army, inhumane conditions, floggings, torture, censorship. And to their shame, the De Valera administration, they executed 6 Irish Republicans in the 1940s, including Richard Goss from Dundalk. And we were in Longford yesterday, and we recalled that Richard Goss was arrested in County Longford. And of course, we also remember today Barney Casey, who was shot in the back, County Longford man. He was remembered yesterday, commander of the Longford IRA, shot in the back by Free State Guards in 1940. With 6 executions, including George Plant, Tipperary. 5 of them were shot by Free State firing squad. But to their lasting shame, the lasting shame of De Valera and Fianna Fáil, they didn't have the guts or the backbone to shoot the boy from Tralee, Charlie Kearns, Chief of Staff of the Irish Republican Army. In December 1944, De Valera, he brought over the English hangman, Pearpoint, to hang the boy from Tralee, Charlie Kearns, in Mountjoy. Shame, shame, shame on them. And I mentioned the hunger strikers. Michael Gohan from Ballina emigrated to London. There's no work here. We have 2 failed states in Ireland. So he joined the Irish Republican Army. And ultimately he ended up in Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight. And as a prisoner of war, he was entitled to and looked for political status, prisoner of war status, which he was denied. And with others, he went on hunger strike. And the British, the Crown, they adopted the cruel practice of force feeding. And similar to Thomas Ashe, the 1916 volunteer who died in Mountjoy in 1917 on hunger strike, he also was force fed. The Crown agents, Thomas Ashe, they pumped liquid into his lungs instead of his stomach. And his funeral brought Dublin to a standstill. Michael Gahan, years later in 1974, again force feeding, and his lung was punctured and he died. And Ireland, and indeed Republicans all over the world, paid great tribute to a fallen Irish soldier. In London and Kilburn, 3,000 mourners marched behind his coffin, and he was accompanied by an IRA Guard of Honour. And a Requiem Mass was held in Kilburn in the Sacred Heart of Jesus Church. And then he was brought, Michael Gahan, our hero, was met at Dublin Airport, and again accompanied by an IRA Guard of Honour, all the way into Dublin city centre, O'Connell Street, accompanied by an IRA Guard of Honour, and Mass was held in Adam and Eve Franciscan Church in Merchants Quay in Dublin. Then his body was taken right across Ireland, through the towns and villages, and the Irish people came out in force to recognise the ultimate sacrifice that Michael Gahan made. And he was buried in the Republican plot in League Cemetery in Ballina, County Mayo. And Daithí O'Connell made his oration that day. And in his final message, Michael Gahan said he was glad to give his life for Ireland. And he urged people to continue on the fight for Irish freedom, to break the connection with England that's still ongoing to this day. And just 2 years later, County Mayo had another hunger striker, as we know, Frank Stagg from Hollymount, and he died in Wakefield prison, and he had been on a number of hunger strikes. And of course, the Free State authorities didn't want to repeat of the Michael Gahan funeral, so to their shame, they hijacked Frank Stagg's body. And the Free State, they buried him under 6 feet of concrete. Shame on the Free State minister at the time, Concrete Cooney, and Cosgrave, who was the Free State Prime Minister, and Fitzgerald and all those others. But of course, Frank Stagg, he had changed his will in the run-up to his death, and he had expressed his legal instruction that he was to be buried in the Republican plot in Ballina League Cemetery alongside his comrade Michael Gahan. And of course, as we know, some months later Republicans ensured that indeed happened. And we're so too proud of all our fallen heroes. And in Mayo here today, our hunger strikers, Jack McNeila, Michael Gahan, and Frank Stagg. And I mentioned earlier Dan Hoban from Castlebar, and lived most of his life in Newport. A lifelong soldier of the Republican movement, and such a loss to us all. He spent in jail by the Free Staters in the 50s, and again in the 70s, and he was the commanding officer in Portlaoise. And we must also remember today another hunger striker, Pat Ward, who, from Donegal, who spent a long time in hunger strike in the 1970s and succumbed to the effects of that a few years later. So, today we vow to continue the struggle, and we reject those reformists, former comrades who implement Crown Rule in the 6 county state, and they're gagging to do likewise down here in the 26 county state. And they attend the coronation of British royals, and they're happy to support the illegal RUC PSNI and implement all the institutions of Stormont. And we remember today that we in Republican Sinn Féin are the true custodians, as Adrian said, of the Easter 1916 proclamation and the first Dáil Éireann in the 32 county All-Ireland Republic. And we remember that Irish people have the right to actively resist, indeed the duty to actively reduce, to break the connection with England. Part of our country, 6 counties, are still illegally occupied by Crown forces. And at Easter we remember all of our former fallen comrades and all of those men and women who have died in the ongoing struggle for Irish freedom and independence. And it's a special honour for me to have spoke here today in Kilkelly. For a Mayo, I'll pump up the boo.
Well done.